Senator Marco Rubio, how are you, sir?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on.
All right, my pleasure. All right, now you're going through murderer's row, according to the liberal media out there. So, anyway,
All right. Yeah.
I want now. First of all, we're friends. I want everybody to know that, and I have a few questions I want to ask here because there's some things I don't understand.
Okay. Let's do it.
How does anyone expect, let's say, people who are illegally, they might be illiterate or barely literate, they speak another language, how are they going to understand this 800-page bill? I mean, it's one thing if I understand it or you understand it. How are they going to understand it?
Well, first of all, I mean, like any of our laws in the country, obviously people that, have to figure out how to comply with them, and certainly there's things that help you, assist you in not breaking the law with regards to things like that. And I imagine there will be plenty of people trying to help people comply with this law, given the different components of it. But let me just say on that, number one, it's 800 pages long because we, quite frankly, want to be thorough about dealing with things like E-Verify and security. Number two is I'm insisting that people have plenty of time to deal with this issue. For example, the Judiciary Committee, which, usually what's been happening here in Washington is they cook up these deals, they bring them right to the floor. This issue is going to the Judiciary Committee, and they're not even going to start working on it until the week of May 7th. And that's going to be an extensive process of amendments and debate, which I think is good because I think it's important to improve on this product. I by no means pretend that I have the answer to every problem. That's why we have a republic, so that people with different views representing different states and different constituencies can read this and have their own input about how to make it better. And I welcome that, and that's why I posted it on my website, and that's why I want people to go on there, read it, and come up with their own suggestions.
So how many hearings will there be?
Well, first of all, we're asking multiple committees to have hearings, not just the Judiciary Committee, and we're going to have hopefully some announcements on that. Number two is the Judiciary Committee has only agreed to 2 hearings now, but then they start the markup process, which, as you well know, is the lengthy process of senators on both sides will offer amendments to the bill. There'll be debate about those amendments, and then and on and on. And that's supposed to. The agreement is that will be unlimited. That they will go through that process until all the senators have had their full say, and then it goes to the floor of the Senate, where the same process would repeat itself. So this is going to go on for at least a couple months, if not longer. We're not even starting on it until after we get back from the next recess and are done with this gun bill, which will be on the floor again next week. So we're talking about beginning the committee process in May, and that's just the first step, obviously. And then the House is going to have a say in this. I mean, we can't just pass a bill out of the Senate. The House is going to have a say, and they're working on a product too.
It's one thing for you or others in Congress to make representations. You have the highest level of integrity of anybody I've ever known, but you don't execute this law. The president executes the law, the attorney general executes the law, and the law today they're not executing. They're not building as much as the fence as they're supposed to build down there. They're not. We participated in my group, Landmark Legal Foundation. We went all the way to the Supreme Court on some of these state laws, and so what makes anyone think that this administration is going to do a better job of enforcing this law?
Well, first of all, I think that's actually an argument for doing something, because if we don't do anything, then the status quo remains, which is they won't do anything. You won't have E-Verify. You won't have. In fact, I think that it's possible that they could, give legal status like they did to the DREAM Act qualificators. I mean, the people that qualified under the DREAM Act, they could do the same thing for millions of people more. What would stop them from doing that? This bill actually mandates that certain things happen. Second, I think it's important for us to remind ourselves of the good news that Barack Obama will not be president forever. He's got 3.5 years left. And then we'll have a new president.
Yeah, but he can do enormous damage like he's already done.
Well, obviously, but here's the point. This bill requires the full implementation of a universal E-Verify system. This bill requires the full implementation of an entry and exit. By law, it requires it. It's not an option. It says you must fully implement an entry-exit system, which is a big deal because 40% of the illegal immigrants in this country are people that came in legally and their visa expired. They didn't leave. We don't know who they are. And the third thing is it requires, if the Department of Homeland Security cannot achieve 100% operational awareness and 90% apprehensions on the border, they lose control of the issue to a commission, not a Washington commission, to a local commission made up of the governors of the 4 border states, talking about Texas and Arizona, where they will then finish the job of securing the border, including a fencing plan. So look, no law is perfect. Obviously, we are always.
Well, let me just say this. I've been around long enough. There was a fencing plan passed several years ago, and they haven't implemented it. I was around in 1986 when a fencing plan was supposed to go in place, and that wasn't implemented. I know you're just one senator. I get that. But I mean, people are concerned. How many more head fakes are we going to deal with here when it comes to this administration?
Well, first of all, the fencing plan wasn't finished because Congress actually amended it. They went back and said, it doesn't have to be 700 miles of double fencing. It only has to be 30-something miles.
Right, and they can come back and do the same thing here.
Absolutely.
Meanwhile, the border's not secure, and we're off and running.
Well, again, I mean, that's true for any law in America. I mean, certainly the Congress can always change it in the future. And ultimately, look, there are consequences to electing bad people to office. I mean, there are consequences to the fact that Barack Obama won his reelection. There are. There's no denying that. And we're living those every single day, and those are the consequences of it. But I just think if we don't do anything, if we just leave things the way they are, it's going to be a lot worse. And so certainly all we can do is pass laws that require them to do things. If a future Congress decides to change it, then obviously we elected the wrong people. If a future president refuses to enforce it, that means we elected the wrong president. But let there be no doubt, in a republic, there are serious consequences to electing the wrong people to office.
Now, let me ask you this question. And that's absolutely true. Let me ask you this. Let's go back to the border, if we could, briefly here.
Yep.
So Napolitano submits this plan, right?
Yes.
And upon the submission of the plan, in other words, there's no requirement that anything actually be built. But upon the submission of the plan, that's when the legalization process begins. Correct?
Well, partially. What happens is not just submitting the plan. They have to submit the plan and secure the funding and begin implementing. In essence, they have to commence with the implementation of the plan. That's why it's called a notice of commencement. And the funding part is important because one of the things we were worried about is that someone in Congress, it takes both sides to fund these things. They could just hold back the money on the fencing or hold back the money on the border, and then she could say, well, I have a plan, but they didn't send us the money, so we can't do it. This is dependent on both the funding being secured and the plan being implemented. But here's the bigger point. They have an incentive to actually get a result because if in 5 years the plan has not reached 100% awareness and 90% apprehension, the Department of Homeland Security, meaning this will be a new president, obviously, will lose control of the issue. It'll be turned over to the border governors to finish the job. And there's money set aside in the bill for them to do it. And I assure you, these border governors...
We're starting to lose you a little bit. If you could adjust the phone or just resituate it. That's better. I'm sorry. Okay. Go right ahead. Yep.
I was just saying that the incentive for them to finish this is twofold. Number one is if these plans are not fully implemented, including E-Verify, the green card process will never begin for the people that are used to be illegally here. And number two, if they don't reach 90% apprehensions by the fifth year, they lose control of this issue. It's turned over to a border commission, which is not a Washington commission made up of congressmen or bureaucrats. It's largely led by the border state governors who have a vested local interest in ensuring that border is secure.
Well, who determines that after 5 years? No. Who determines if they haven't?
The General Accounting Office, the GAO, which everybody agrees it's the group that's telling us now that the border isn't secure in certain sectors. The GAO, and in fact, the GAO not only tells us whether the 90% is being met. The GAO, the General Accounting Office, tells us at the front end whether the plan that they're actually offering is a real plan that has any chance of working. And in addition to that, although at that stage in the process, the Border Commission is still an advisory panel, it will be operating. There will be a Border Commission with these border state governors. And I can just tell you that if Janet Napolitano and Department of Homeland Security comes up with a plan that's not a real plan, I don't think Jan Brewer or Susana Martinez or Rick Perry are going to hold back at letting us know that at the front
But don't you already have significant movement toward legalization by that time?
Well, all you have is the beginning of the process where people have to come forward, undergo a background check, pay the fine for what they've done, and what they get is a legal status that allows them to work. But it's not a permanent legal status. It is a renewable status. It expires after 6 years. That means in 6 years they got to come back and reapply for that legal status. And when they reapply, they have to once again pay a fine, once again pay the application fee, and then prove that they have been paying taxes for the last 6 years and are not unemployed and are not a public charge. And one more point, Mark. Under this entire period of time, meaning when they're under the legal status, they don't qualify for any federal benefits. Not Obamacare, not food stamps, not welfare. It is prohibited. And it's
now, let me ask you about that. Right now, It's my understanding. I'm no expert on this, and you are an expert, obviously, but people who come into this country, even legally, are supposed to show, it's my understanding, that they have the capacity to feed themselves, to fend for themselves.
That's right.
And it's my understanding that's not being, it's called what now?
It's called the public charge law.
And it's not being enforced.
They're not verifying it, and beyond that, there's not a clear standard for it. It's kind of a subjective standard. We actually define it. For a single individual, we define it as making at least 125% of the poverty level. Obviously, the more people in your household, the higher that number becomes. So we actually define it. You have to actually prove it. And here's the bigger point. When it comes time to renew, because there's this notion that once they get temporary status, it just goes on forever. It's a renewable thing. It expires and needs to be renewed. And the point is, when you go back and renew it, not only do you have to prove you're not a public charge, you have to prove that you've been employed the last 6 years and that you've been paying taxes the last 6 years. So it's not just a trust factor. You actually have
All right, let me stop you a second. Let's say that first of all, do we have the infrastructure for all this? I mean, I'm hearing all these rules and paperwork and filings and people tracking. When I was at the Justice Department, the old INS, with all due respect to you folks who used to work there, was considered one of the worst bureaucracies on the face of the earth. Has it changed?
Well, a couple things. Number one is we now have technological tools at our disposal that we've never had before. Second point is that's why I tell everybody we are not going to legalize 11 million people in the first year or even the second year. This is going to take multiple years. This is going to take time to process all of this. So this idea that somehow we're going to have massive legalization on day one is just not possible. You just can't process that many people through a background check and all the things that they have to undergo in that regard. And by the way, this is also true at the back end when the green card process starts. After 10 years, and E-Verify, and the entry-exit system, et cetera, we're limiting green cards to 2 million people a year. It's not, 10 million people in the first year. So even there, even if you do the 10-year, it's limited to the number of people that can get it precisely for the reason you've pointed out, and that is you just can't process that many people in an orderly way without making mistakes or overlooking things. So
let me go back to the border here, because I think in many respects it comes down to this. We don't secure the border. All this is well and good, but we're going to still have illegal aliens coming into this country, and we're going to have this problem again. I recall in 2006 we passed a law. I want to get back to requiring that they build this border fence. Yes. 750 miles, as you say, double layer fencing. 36 miles were built. DHS had maximum freedom on how to apply its money. And I'm looking at this bill. Napolitano has an awful lot of discretion under this bill, doesn't she?
Well, two things. Number one, what happened after 2006 is that Congress came back a couple years later and weakened that provision. They actually weakened it, so DHS did not have to comply with it because they weakened it. They actually said it doesn't have to be double fencing, et cetera, et cetera.
And 2006, was that Republicans?
The answer is, I guess it was. I wasn't there, so I don't.
What the hell's going to happen with the Democrats? I'm just thinking out. This isn't criticism of you. I'm just thinking. Good Lord.
I would just say two things. Again, the issue is they may have discretion as to what the plan looks like to some extent, but ultimately they're going to be judged by the result. If they don't achieve 90% apprehensions and 100% awareness at the border, DHS loses control of the issue. It gets turned over to the border governors to finish the job. And so I think they're going to have an incentive to do that. And furthermore, they're going to have an incentive to do it because of the green card process, which is what the Democrats really want to see start. That can't happen for 10 years.
All right, let me ask you that. Let me
add one more point, because I think this is important on the border stuff. The E-Verify system is the magnet. What attracts people to this country is the ability to find jobs that will pay them in cash, and that's why they're coming. That's what's drawing them here. This E-Verify thing, we are going to double the penalties for violations. We are going to triple the penalty for willful violations and include jail time involved in that. There's going to be very serious consequences to employers that are hiring people illegally and knowingly hiring people illegally.
All right, let me ask you this.
And not complying with E-Verify.
An illegal alien gets a green card. Are they eligible then for welfare and entitlements and so forth?
No, you are not eligible for welfare or entitlements during the first 5 years of your green card status. That's actually existing law right now. Mm-hmm. You don't qualify for federal benefits during your first 5 years on a green card under existing law, and we don't change that.
And is that enforced today?
Yeah, obviously the question is whether they're double checking it. We hear claims of people that are going in and they're not checking them and cross-checking them. So I've already had a couple of senators today come up to me and suggest that when people go in to apply for these benefits, these government benefits, that they run them through the E-Verify system to ensure that they're either legally here or that they're not on temporary status. I actually thought that was a pretty good suggestion, that we should use the E-Verify system not just for employment, but for public benefits.
Unfortunately, I only have time for one more quick question,
Yeah.
Senator Marco Rubio, and it's this. Let me ask you a basic question.
Yeah.
We've got all this stuff going on in this country with the debt, which is massive. People are looking for jobs. Every poll shows, or certainly a recent one today shows, 4% of the American people even give a damn about this. Other than, securing the border, why should America bend over backwards to a pathway to citizenship 10 years, 20 years, 100 years? Why should Americans bend over backwards over this citizen issue? Particularly for people who've come here illegally. I know people bring up the children, but let's put them aside. What about the people who've come here illegally? And also we have cases where people have been deported, they come back, they would be subject at some point to this pathway. We have people who've committed 3 misdemeanors, 2 misdemeanors, they come back. Why should the American people say, yes, we want to have this pathway to citizenship?
Well, a couple things. First of all, this issue was going to happen with or without us because the Democrats were going to raise it and push it. So we had to have an alternative to what to solve it. Secondly, I think it actually hurts our economy to have 11 million people in this country that are not documented, that are illegally here. They're working in our environment. They're depressing wages for Americans because they're illegal. They can't claim any rights. So some employers are literally just paying them less. We've all seen this. People standing out in a corner by a Home Depot, guy pulls up in a pickup truck and takes them to a work site, pays them in cash. And they can do that now because these folks are undocumented and, quite frankly, have no choice but to work under that. I think that's bad for our economy. They're showing up at our emergency rooms. They're having traffic accidents because they're driving without a driver's license and don't have health insurance. To what we have now, we're spending, how many billions of dollars are we spending now on enforcement mechanisms and trying to change this and chase this around and still not doing it in a good way? So it's just bad for our economy.
All right, Senator. All right, thank you. If you don't mind, we'd like to have you back once you're done with some of the other fellows, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
All right, take care. Appreciate it. Senator Marco Rubio, I've got to move. Folks, I wish I had an hour. I've got 1,000 questions, but I don't have time.